About 2 years ago, I was cycling along a deserted road toward Orgeval, beyond Poissy, when a sudden bend revealed an estate that struck me so profoundly I leapt off my bicycle to take a closer look. In an old, spacious garden, among bare trees bent under the icy November wind, stood a brick house. At first glance, nothing remarkable. Yet it exuded a mute, oppressive gloom, a sense of abandonment that gripped the heart. It drew the eye involuntarily. One gate leaf hung broken, and on a rain-washed, faded board, a sign announced the estate was for sale. I stepped into the garden, yielding to a surge of curiosity and a vague unease. It seemed the house had stood uninhabited for 30, perhaps 40 years. The bricks along the cornices and window frames had split from winter frosts, now veiled in moss and lichen. Cracks ran across the facade, like premature wrinkles on a face that still held strength but had long been forsaken. The steps leading to the porch were fractured, overgrown with nettles and thorny shrubs, as if barring the way to this house of sorrow. The windows looked especially forlorn, dirty, bare, curtainless. The panes had long been shattered by boys, and through them one could peer into the dark, empty rooms. The windows resembled dead, wide-open eyes on a lifeless face. All around stretched a neglected garden. Beneath a layer of weeds, the outlines of flower beds were barely discernible. Paths had vanished under the onslaught of ravenous vegetation, and the grove had turned into a wild thicket. It all resembled an abandoned cemetery, where greenery had run rampant in the damp shade of ancient trees from which the autumn wind tore the last leaves, moaning plaintively in the air. I stood for a long time, lost in thought, listening to the mournful lament that seemed to rise from the earth itself. My heart ached with a vague fear and growing sorrow, yet I couldn't bring myself to leave. Held back by a burning pity, a need to understand why everything here felt so unbearably sad. At last, I resolved to leave the garden. Across the road, near a fork, I spotted a miserable shack, something like a tavern. I headed there, hoping to speak with the locals. Inside, there was only an old woman, groaning and wheezing. She handed me a mug of beer and immediately began to complain about her life, about the lonely road where, on a good day, 2 cyclists might pass. She turned out to be talkative and soon shared her story. Her name was Aunt Toussaint. She and her husband had come from Vernon to open the tavern. At first, things went well, but after her husband's death, everything fell apart. I interrupted her tale to ask about the abandoned estate. The old woman looked at me with suspicion, as if I were trying to pry something dangerous from her. Ah, Sauvager, the haunted house, that's what we call it. But I know nothing, sir. It didn't happen in my time. This Easter will mark 30 years I've been here, and that was 40 years ago. When we moved in, the house was already abandoned, much like it is now. The years go by, and the bricks keep crumbling. Then why hasn't anyone bought the estate, if it's for sale? I asked. Why? Who knows? People say all sorts of things. It seemed I had earned her trust, and clearly, she was eager to share what people say. She told me that once night falls, not a single girl from the nearby village dares step into Sauvager. They say a restless soul wanders there every night. I was surprised that so close to Paris, people still believe such tales. The old woman shrugged, trying to show she wasn't easily frightened, though it was clear she was putting on a brave face. But still, sir, it's not just stories. People came, want to buy it. Everything seemed fine at first. And then, poof, gone like the wind, not one ever returned. The moment someone enters the house, strange things begin. Doors slam shut on their own, as if caught by a gust. Cries, moans, and sobs echo from the cellar. And if you don't leave, then comes the voice, Angeline, 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 so sorrowful it freezes the blood. I'm telling you, it's true. Ask anyone. I confess, her tale left an impression. I even felt a chill. And who is Angeline? Ah, sir, I suppose I'll have to tell it all. Though again, I know nothing. And she told me the story. Some 40 years ago, around 1858, when the Second Empire was steeped in celebration, Monsieur de G, a court official, was widowed. He was left with a 10-year-old daughter, Angeline, a girl of extraordinary beauty, the spitting image of her mother. 2 years later, he married a famed beauty, the widow of a general. Rumor had it that after the wedding, jealousy flared between Angeline and her stepmother. The girl was wounded by how quickly her mother had been forgotten, and the stepmother was irritated by the living portrait of a woman she could never erase from her husband's heart. Sauvager belonged to the new Madame de G, and one evening, they say, upon seeing the father kiss his daughter tenderly, the stepmother, in a fit of jealousy, pushed the girl so hard she fell, struck the back of her head, and died. The end was even more dreadful. The father, confused and desperate to protect his wife, buried the child himself in the cellar. The body lay there for years, while everyone was told the girl was staying with an aunt. The crime was uncovered by a dog that howled and scratched at the ground. The scandal was hushed up in the Tuileries. Monsieur and Madame de G are long dead, but Angeline, they say, still answers the call from beyond every night. And let anyone say I'm lying. Aunt Toussaint concluded, "It's all true, believe me." Her story stirred me. Though it seemed implausible, the grim drama seized my imagination. I had heard of Monsieur de... Indeed, he had married twice, and some misfortune had shadowed his life. Could be true. What a tragedy. What passions, bordering on madness. A monstrous crime born of jealousy. A girl, radiant as day, killed by her stepmother and buried by her father in the cellar. What force of feeling, what horror. I wanted to ask more, to argue, but thought better of it. Why? Better to carry this dreadful tale with me, the fruit of folk imagination. Mounting my bicycle, I cast one last glance at Sauvager. Dusk had fallen. The sorrowful house stared at me through its windows, empty, dim, like the eyes of corpse. And the autumn wind moaned in the branches of the old trees. Why did this story carve itself so deeply into my memory, haunt me like an obsession, and become a true torment? It is one of those psychological enigmas that defy easy explanation. I tried in vain to convince myself that such legends are common in villages, and that this tale was not worth special attention. But the image of the dead girl would not let me go. I seemed to hear that same inconsolable voice, which for 40 years, night after night, had called out in the empty house for the lovely, tragically lost Angeline. During the first 2 months of winter, I began to search. After all, such a dramatic event as the disappearance of a child must have left a trace. Surely the newspapers of the time would have mentioned it. I leafed through archives of the National Library, but found not a single line that could be linked to the story. I questioned contemporaries, people who had once moved in court circles, but no one could offer anything definite. The accounts were contradictory, and I had nearly lost hope of uncovering the truth, though the mystery continued to torment me. Then, quite unexpectedly, chance pointed me toward a new lead. Every 2 or 3 weeks, I visited a fellow writer, a poet named V, for whom I felt sincere affection and admiration. He passed away this April, at around 70 years of age. Paralysis had long confined him to a chair in his study on Rue d'Assas, whose windows overlooked the Luxembourg Gardens. There he spent his final days in peace, surrendering to dreams. Removed from reality, he had conjured an ideal world through the power of imagination, a world in which he loved and suffered. Who among us does not remember his kindly face, his childlike curls of silver hair, and those pale blue eyes that retained the purity of youth? One could not say he lied. He simply fantasized endlessly, and it was hard to discern the boundary between his reality and his invention. He was a charming old man, long detached from time, and every conversation with him stirred me, as if lifting the veil on some unknown, mysterious realm. That day, we spoke by the window of his small room, where the fireplace blazed brightly. Outside, the frost was bitter, and the Luxembourg Gardens lay beneath a dazzling blanket of snow. I don't recall why I brought up Sauvager, the strange story that still troubled me. The father who remarried, the stepmother jealous of her stepdaughter, the living portrait of the dead wife, the girl's death and her secret burial in the cellar. He listened with that serene smile that never left him, even in moments of sorrow. I fell silent. His gaze wandered into the boundless whiteness of the garden, and the dreaminess in his eyes seemed to wrap him in a gentle halo. I knew Monsieur de well, he said slowly. I knew his first wife, a woman of unearthly beauty, and his second, no less lovely. I even loved them both passionately, though I never confessed it. I knew Angeline, too, more exquisite still, the kind of girl men would worship. But things did not happen quite as you've described. A tremor of excitement passed through me. Could I finally learn the truth I had long given up hope of finding? At first, I believed the poet. "Oh, my dear friend," I cried, "if only you knew what a service you would do me." At last I could find peace. "Speak, tell me everything." But he seemed not to hear. His gaze drifted far away. Then he began to speak, as if in a dream, summoning people and events from oblivion as they surfaced in his memory. In Angeline's soul, at 12 years old, bloomed a true woman's love, with all its joys and torments. The girl was madly jealous of her father's new wife, whom she saw constantly at his side. She suffered as if from a terrible betrayal. Her father's remarriage insulted not only the memory of her mother, it tore Angeline's heart apart. Every night, she heard her mother's voice calling to her from the grave. And then, one day, when the pain became unbearable, she plunged a knife in her heart to be united with her mother forever. I cried out, "My God, can that be possible?" What despair, what horror Monsieur and Madame de G endured the next day, he continued, ignoring my exclamation. They found Angeline lifeless, the knife buried to the hilt in her chest. They were preparing to travel to Italy, and only the old servant who had raised the girl remained in the house. Fearing they would be accused of murder, they buried the child with her help, not in the cellar, but at the foot of a great orange tree in a corner of the greenhouse behind the house. She was found there after the parents' deaths, when the old nurse revealed everything. I felt a flicker of doubt. I watched him closely, troubled. Had he invented it all? But do you yourself believe that Angeline returns there each night, answering the call of that sorrowful voice? I asked. He looked at me and smiled gently. Return from there, my friend? But we all return from there. Why do you refuse to believe that the soul of our dear departed still dwells where she once loved and suffered? If a voice calls to her, it means she has not yet been reborn into eternal life. But she will be reborn, have no doubt. Everything is reborn. Nothing vanishes without a trace, especially love and beauty. Angeline, 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 and she will be reborn in sunlight and flowers. Of course, I found neither peace nor certainty. My old friend V, the poet child, had only deepened my confusion. No doubt he had invented it all. But perhaps, like all visionaries, he had glimpsed a fragment of truth. Is it true, all that you've just told me? I asked, laughing. He smiled meekly. But of course it's true. Isn't the infinity of the universe true? That was our last conversation. Soon after, I left Paris, and I still see his pensive gaze drifting across the snowy expanse of the Luxembourg Gardens. He was at peace because he believed in the creations of his boundless imagination, and I remained tormented by the desire to know the truth that kept slipping away. A year and a half had passed. In that time, I had wandered far, endured bitter losses and vivid joys, while storms raged above me, sweeping each soul toward unknown shores. Yet there were moments when, from afar, through the thickness of time itself, I seemed to hear that inconsolable voice, Angeline, 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 and I would shudder, seized by doubt, tormented by the thirst to know the truth. The story never left my thoughts, and for me, there is no torment more cruel than uncertainty. I cannot say how, on one radiant June evening, while cycling, I suddenly found myself on the deserted road leading to Sauvagear. Had I returned there deliberately? Or had I simply turned off the main route without thinking? It was around 8 o'clock. The sky, as it often is on long summer days, still glowed, bathed in the gold of sunset, and stretched above me like a boundless ocean of azure. The air was light, tender, filled with the scent of grasses and trees. Everything around breathed peace, joy, serenity. Just as on that first visit, I leapt from my bicycle in astonishment at the sight of Sauvagear. For a moment, I even doubted, was this truly the same estate? New gates gleamed in the sunlight. The fence had been restored, and the house itself, barely visible through the foliage, seemed renewed, alive. Could this be the rebirth I had long imagined? Had Angeline heard the distant call and returned to life? I stood there, unable to believe my eyes, when suddenly I started at the sound of shuffling footsteps behind me. It was Aunt Toussaint, driving a cow from the neighboring field of alfalfa. "They don't seem afraid?" I asked, gesturing toward the house. The old woman recognized me and came to a halt. "Ah, sir, there are people who believe neither in God nor the devil. It's been over a year since the estate was sold. A painter bought it, Monsieur and you know what artists are like. Nothing frightens them." As she walked away, she added with a shake of her head, "We'll see how it all turns out. I knew Monsieur B. only slightly, a refined and gifted portraitist of charming Parisienne. We exchanged greetings at the theater, at exhibitions, in those places where acquaintances cross paths with ease. Suddenly, I was seized by an irresistible urge to visit him, to speak openly, to learn everything he knew about Sauvagear. Without hesitation, forgetting my dusty cycling clothes, I leaned my bicycle against a moss-covered tree. At the cheerful ring of the gate bell, a servant appeared. I handed him my card, and he left me alone in the garden for a moment. I looked around, and my astonishment deepened. The facade had been restored, No cracks, no crumbling bricks. The porch, framed by roses, seemed to beckon me in. The windows, now alive, appeared to smile, promising warmth and light within. The garden had been cleared of nettles and thorns. The flower beds bloomed in vibrant color, and the ancient trees, bathed in golden sunlight, seemed to have grown young again. The servant led me into the drawing room and informed me that Monsieur B had gone to a neighboring village but would return shortly. I was willing to wait as long as necessary. At first, I examined the room's decor. Plush carpets, cretonne curtains, and drapes matched to the sofa and armchairs. The heavy folds of the curtains cast a dim twilight over the room, and I was surprised by the gloom that reigned there. Soon, night fell completely. It seemed I had been forgotten. Not even a lamp was brought. And so, sitting in the dark, I once again sank into memories of the tragedy. Was Angeline murdered? Or had she plunged the knife into her own heart? I must confess, in this house, once again steeped in twilight silence, I felt uneasy. First a slight chill, then a rising dread, until I was frozen by a mad terror. I began to hear sounds, muffled moans, restrained sobs, heavy footsteps, likely from the cellar. The noises grew louder, closer. It felt as though the entire house was gripped by anxiety. And then a thunderous voice rang out. Angeline, 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 growing louder, stronger. I felt an icy breath on my face. The door to the drawing room flew open, and Angeline entered, running through without noticing me. I recognized her instantly, in the beam of light from the hallway. The very same girl, dead at 12, astonishingly beautiful, with golden hair cascading over her shoulders, dressed all in white, radiant as purity itself. She passed silently, her gaze vacant, disappeared through the door, and again, the cry, now distant. Angeline, Angeline, Angeline. I was paralyzed, sweat broke on my brow. My hair stood on end at the breath of mystery. Almost at once, perhaps at the very moment the servant brought the lamp, I realized Monsieur B had returned. He shook my hand, apologizing for the delay. Trembling with emotion, I confessed why I had come. How surprised he was by my tale, how kindly he laughed, trying to dissuade me. My dear friend, you probably don't know that I'm related to Monsieur de G.'s second wife. Poor woman, how could anyone accuse her of murdering her stepdaughter, whom she loved as dearly as the father did? There's only one truth in your story. The girl did die here, but not by hand, not by knife. Heavens! She died of a fever, sudden as a lightning strike. The parents never returned. The house was bound to a painful memory. After their deaths, endless legal disputes delayed the sale. I had long dreamed of buying it, waited for the chance, and I assure you, we've never seen any ghosts here. But I was still trembling and murmured, "But Angeline, I just saw her." A voice called her, and she ran through this room. He looked at me, bewildered, as if questioning my sanity, then suddenly burst into laughter, the kind only truly happy people can manage. "That's my daughter. She's the one you saw." Monsieur de G was her godfather, and in memory of his daughter, he gave her the name Angeline. No doubt her mother called her, and she passed through the drawing room. He opened the door and called, "Angeline, Angeline, Angeline." The same girl appeared, alive, cheerful. Yes, it was her, in a white dress, with wonderful golden hair, radiant with hope, like a spring blossom promising love and a long, happy life. Ah, sweet ghost, A new child come to take the place of the one who left. Death is defeated. My old friend, the poet V, had not invented it. Nothing vanishes without a trace. Everything is reborn. Beauty like love. The voice of the mother calls to today's girls, future beloveds, and they awaken under the caress of sunlight among flowers. The child's appearance returned youth and joy to the haunted house, gifting it the bliss of newly found eternal life. Ladies and gentlemen, subscribe to the channel. Share your impressions and thoughts in the comments. I'd be delighted to hear from you.